Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Immerse, and in each episode, I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. Today's guest is someone whose journey as a writer is nothing short of extraordinary. I'm joined by Uttama Kirit Patel, the author of the beautifully evocative debut, Shape of an Apostrophe, a book that not only explores identity, voice and vulnerability, but also represents a story of resilience, patience and deep self-belief. Uttama's writing journey wasn't a straight line. It was full of pauses, pivots and moments of uncertainty. But through it all, she carved out her own version of trusting the process, refusing to let go of the quiet conviction that her words mattered and they had to be shared. In today's conversation, Uttama opens up about what it really takes to become a writer in your own time, in your own way, on your own terms, and how she moved from her notes and her drafts to holding her first published book in her hand. Whether you're a writer, a dreamer, or someone walking through your own long process of trusting the process, this one is for you.
So, Uttama, thank you so much. It's so lovely to finally get talking to you. We'd love to hear more about you and your background before we indulge into your wonderful book. So do you mind just starting by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. And pleasure to be here. I'm Uttama Kirit Patel, author of the novel Shape of an Apostrophe. I am Indian by ethnicity and soul. I grew up in Abu Dhabi in the late 80s before the first movie cinema even opened. Um, and since then have lived across, more than a dozen cities, New York City, Hong Kong, Singapore, London. I'm transient as a human, I should say. I've also, across all those different places, pursued different professions. So I was a journalist, an editor, a marketing strategist, a founder. And actually, when I last lived in Abu Dhabi, I founded a magazine called South Asian Parent, which is for families sort of stuck between cultures and identities. So that's a little bit about me. Everywhere I've been and everything I've done, I've always just been a writer at heart. My family consists of me and my husband and our 3-year-old daughter and our nearly 6-year-old Labradoodle, Sadie. And we, as I mentioned, we've lived in just so many big cities and places around the world. And we wanted a lifestyle change. We wanted a change in pace and to be more present with each other. And so it was a very intentional choice to move to Phuket, where it's a whole different world.
I really love that. And all those experiences then, so sort of moving from Abu Dhabi to Thailand, how has that impacted your environment, your influences, your creativity?
So it's a good question. I would love to say that the environment impacts my creativity. It does to some extent, but if I am honest, I think my inner world is the stronger indicator of my creativity. So, of course, being in a place like Phuket and by the nature of being in nature and having the ocean and the lush greenery, my personal state is less stressed and less impacted, should I say, by the kind of collective noise of a burnt out city. And therefore, my creativity and my ideas thrive. But really, I think I could be in any environment, and if I'm in the wrong state of mind, then writing is a challenge.
Yeah, I really love that because actually you're calling out just your mindset. The environment helps, but actually it's all from within yourselves. That's so beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, sometimes it's, you have ideas of like, oh, this place is like would be wonderful to write in, and or I've got a day to myself and it's just going to be so freeing and I'll think of the best ideas. And that's not really how it works, right? If something's kind of sitting in your tummy or you're stressed about or just kind of lingering in your thoughts, then that's a bigger block, I think, to any endeavor, whether it's creative or not.
Yeah, nice. So it just sounds like you're very aware of what your blockers are and when they show up for you. Amazing.
Learned. Yeah, yeah. I've learned them along the way, I should say.
Nice, nice. And your beautiful book. So we'll maybe talk about some of your blockers a little bit later in today's conversation. But I got your beautiful book through the post. I absolutely love the colors. I love the cover of it. So let's start and talk a
Thank
bit about
you.
your book then. So Shape of an Apostrophe. Where did the idea for the book originally come from?
It came from an apology letter that I was writing to the biological child that I had decided not to have in favor of adoption. So since I was 16 years old in school in Abu Dhabi, I have always wanted to adopt. And when it came time to actually grow our family, I found myself overwhelmed with emotions. And one of those dominant emotions was guilt, like guilt over making an unconventional choice. And as I was writing it and feeling guilty, I felt angry about having to feel guilty. And so I wanted to write a story, a view that just challenged the presumption that all women want to be mothers or want to mother in a specific way. And I also wanted to write a character that was the opposite of me. I've always wanted to be a mother, but just in a different, way, if that's even true, I don't know. But that's where, and that letter was titled "To My Forsaken Fetus," parentheses, female. And there's fragments of that letter that appear in the novel now, but that's where it began.
So I loved how you called out an emotion that when you wrote out that letter, that guilt came in. And actually, a lot of your book stems from an emotion that you felt quite strongly about. That's so, so beautiful.
And many women feel that, guilt across so many things related to motherhood, not motherhood, marriage, family. I don't know. It's always been an emotion that I know we need all our emotions, but I really despise that. It's so heavy to carry around and it can be so destructive if we let it fester. And so I was really confronted by that guilt and then was inspired to write about it.
Yeah, and that shows like really deep self-awareness because actually a lot of us, when we think of our emotions, when somebody asks us how we're feeling in the moment or when we're journaling, guilt is not often a emotion that comes to us straight away, even though it could be, harnessed a lot deeper within the emotions we're feeling. So
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that. Thank you. And was there a particular moment for you or an experience that pushed you to say, I really need to write this book now?
Um, there there was, and I don't often bring this up, maybe because I'm not often asked this question, but it was 2012 after the gang rape of Jyoti Singh Pandey in Delhi. And something immediately shifted in me. And I knew then, and I had written about it in a letter to her in memory. I knew then that I would not live with myself until I told a story that highlighted that even in, the seemingly progressive, modern, whatever word you want to use to describe a family, we're still carrying around deeply ingrained sexist attitudes, behaviors, expectations, power dynamics that, for whatever reason, allows men to exert control over women. And I think there was some dialogue around that incident where, people almost felt like that was a thing they could distance themselves from. Like, that wouldn't happen with my daughter. She wouldn't be on the bus. she might not be on the bus, right? But we're still perpetuating ideologies at our dinner table, casually at parties that put women as secondary to men. We're still doing that. We're doing that across the world, everywhere. And I think that was the moment really, and when you asked that question, it just came up immediately, and I didn't really consciously think of that until you asked me that question. But that was the moment where there was no turning back. Like, I was going to tell this story and I was going to say that. And, things like that happen, incidents happen. There's been so many, incidents of violence beyond her case. And we feel something deeply and then we forget about it and we get consumed by other things. And that was something that was uncomfortable for me and I just wanted to never forget it. And so I wanted to make sure that I told a story that somehow pointed to, a lot of those things that are at play now. What happened to her is something horrific and extreme, but it is an accumulation of ideologies and behaviors and attitudes, and it starts at home, I think.
Yeah. No, great. So, I mean, you told us a bit about the emotion behind it and a bit about, what inspired you to want to write it. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about the journey then? How did you go from, realizing in that moment, this is something I'm really passionate about writing about, to getting it to that first draft state?
Yeah, it was slow. It was a slow process, but you sort of have an idea that stays in your brain and your heart. And then I was working in a corporate marketing job, and through kind of life circumstances, my husband and I decided to move to New York. And I thought, well, New York, what better place to finally write? And so I kind of took the idea that I had and decided to focus just on fiction writing for that time that I was in New York. I took some creative writing classes, and that was the first kind of formal instruction that I'd taken for creative writing. And that idea then developed just in those classes. I was experimenting with it. I wrote a short story in one of those classes and didn't really love it, but everybody else really loved the character. And so my teacher at the time suggested that I expand that story and write a novel around those characters. And ever the obedient student, I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then it grew into the novel. And I would say the first draft, like from idea to first draft, was probably 2 years. And then, it took me 5 years until I got after that to get to the final draft. But yeah, that's the simplest answer I can give to how this the writing came about.
And it really does sound like the book's traveled with you, the writing style has traveled with you as well. And I noticed on your Instagram account that you were in London at the lovely Daunt Books, one of my favorite bookshops ever. And you spoke a bit there about your imposter syndrome and your self-doubt. Do you mind just sharing a bit about, what experiences you went through? How did you overcome and manage and even recognize that imposter syndrome, that self-doubt as you were going through the journey of writing your different drafts?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, I'll put them two separately, actually, the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome. I think writing is 95% overcoming self-doubt. You literally are faced with self-doubt every fifth word that you write. And I don't know a single writer who wouldn't say nearly the same thing. It is a part of the process of writing, and it is the largest demon that exists as a block to writing. It's like, and now that you write on a computer, it's so easy to delete. So writing is primarily writing, deleting it, rewriting it, deleting it until you have built enough resistance against the self-doubt that continuously stops you from writing. So, I read about writing, I listened to other authors, and I learned to sit together and respect self-doubt and myself in the same space. And I thought, if I don't get through to writing a rubbish first draft, I will never get to a beautiful final draft. So self-doubt definitely throughout the writing process. imposter syndrome, I felt less in the writing because, that imposter syndrome kind of by its nature is like a comparison against something, right? Or somebody, and you shouldn't be in a space that is reserved for somebody that's not like you. That I felt more in getting published and the publication journey, and also, just by being from one place, living in another place, telling a story about a third place. And when I was approaching agents with the story, there was, this feedback that they didn't know where to place me. They didn't know which market I was in. So writing the book and selling the book are just so two different things. And there was also the idea that because I was a brown woman, I had some sort of responsibility to tell a story or give a message about my community versus just telling a story. And so even though I knew that shouldn't be true, you still felt like you just feel like an outsider, no matter which space I was in, whether it was publishing in India, publishing in the UK, publishing in the US. And that's probably the biggest challenge, or the time that I felt that the strongest. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really powerful, actually. And you've touched upon it a bit, and then you spoke a bit about your emotional blockers that you identified as you've gone through this journey. Do you mind telling us a bit more about, what were those emotional blockers? How did you identify them? And what did you learn in that process?
I would say the biggest block is probably the same one that one needs to overcome in life, which is what will people think? Because when you're writing, people are going to read it. And, there's lots of lovely la-di-da things about just write for yourself. And I don't believe it for a minute. Like, if you were just writing for yourself, then you're not intending to be published, which lots of people write for themselves. But when you're writing with the idea that you want to put out a book and put out something into the world, I think the biggest blocker is, how is this going to be received? What will people think of the story? What will people think of me? And this gaze of a potential audience was a block that I had to overcome. The way that I overcame it was to envision only one reader for the novel that I was writing for and to. And for me, that reader was my yet to be born, yet to be adopted daughter. And so it really helped to just channel. It's like, okay, Uttama, it's not that you're writing for nobody, but you're just writing for this one person. So write your heart out. And I think sometimes thinking about this larger, how will it be received and what will the industry think and what will people think of it is just really so hard to overcome. But when you can kind of narrow it down into, okay, I'm doing this for this one thing or this one person or this one reason, it can be easier to manage, I think, some of those blocks. So it worked for me.
Yeah, nice. So really identifying and understanding how best to manage it, and some really lovely tips there from a writer's perspective. Coming to more failure, when did you fail in the process?
Many times. Many times. It's so, writing is an isolating process. You write by yourself unless you're co-authoring a book. And so you are responsible for the failure, and then you feel the impact of that failure. And it's really just all happening within myself, I would say, yeah, failure at different stages, maybe times where I thought the book was ready to be out and it wasn't yet good enough. Or, I had one of my characters, I had to change the gender in the middle of the story because it just didn't work. So as a writer, that's a failure. You had this whole idea in your head and it's wrong. So there's small failures, there's big failures. It took me a long time to find an agent, and there was 88 rejections from agents before the one that represented me. Those might be considered 88 failures, but I have a phenomenal agent now, so I'm really happy that happened. And yeah, I've forgotten now. Was there a second part to your question?
No, it was just really interesting to hear, some of the challenges you faced and actually how, even when you talked about your agent, you're saying you're really grateful for those 88
Yeah.
rejections, those 88 failures. What other aspects maybe didn't go to plan, but actually in hindsight now you're so happy it worked out the way they did?
Yeah, I had uh, an offer from a larger publishing house, a more traditional publishing house. And again, thanks to my agent, who was just very wise and visionary and said, you don't have to take the first offer you get. And, there's advantages and disadvantages to being at an independent publishing house versus the traditional publishing house, kind of. And the child in me that's always wanted to have a book published is like, how would I ever not just take an offer somebody wants to publish my book? But of course, in hindsight, I waited and got this offer from Apostrophe Patel, and they've been amazing, to work with and edit with. And so a lot of times in the moment, you don't know that, you don't know whether you're doing the right thing, whether it's the best thing for the book or yourself or whatever. And I think it's, only time really shows what those result in.
Yeah, I love that because it's that whole trusting the process, and actually it sounds the process worked really well for you.
Well, yeah, and going back to that thing about feeling like an outsider, I will say it has been hard to trust the process of publishing, not the process of writing, which I know, but and if I'm transparent, it's still hard for me to trust that process. There's lots of places and spaces where it might seem obvious that I would be included and I am not, or there's just, assumptions made about where my story will be relevant. And I think that's the point of stories. The whole point of stories is to open it maybe to places where it isn't relevant yet.
Yes.
And yeah, so yeah, it's interesting you said that about trusting the process, and I'm not fully there yet in trusting it, but I'm learning.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like, you're picking what part of the process works for you, what you like, what you don't like, and what you're noticing is maybe new blockers, new challenges that come with the process actually.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a learning process for any, I think, debut author, especially because I knew nothing about it before,
Yeah.
and yeah, you're absolutely spot on that you are sort of selecting what to pay attention to and what to internalize and what to let go of. And, I am slowly learning the more and more I let go of, the more and more comes to me. Um,
I love that. More and more cups. I love a good quote. So yeah, I love that. And just following your journey, following your experiences, emotions you felt, what really kept you committed, as you realize there's spaces maybe where you're not welcomed, there's tables where there's no seat for you, there's rooms where they're not opening the door for you, but actually what kept you committed to writing this?
Two things. One, that the story needed to be told. To some degree, I felt powerless in the face of my story. Like, this story demanded to be told, and I was not having it that it would not be told. One way or another, it was going to be told. Because I cared deeply about, presenting that narrative of the nuance of maternal desire and intentional parenthood and the gendered branding of domestic life. All those things really just kept me going, like the story needed to be told. I think the other part would have to be the formidable confidence of my husband. And I say confidence, not support, which makes him sound secondary. But when you are writing a novel for 7 years and then it's taken another 2 to get published, it's nearly a decade that this has lived in our life. And I was working a full-time job, so I used to write every Saturday, which meant I didn't socialize. I didn't do date night. I didn't go to anything that was scheduled on a Saturday. And, he was able to make space for this story in our lives without guilt, without making me feel like there should be any other way. And so him, my friends, my family that understood, and at times when I was kind of going down, make sure to lift me up and remind me that it was important, and that I thought it was important, and that the story would need to be done and out. So I think, a combination of both those things.
And that's so nice because actually what I'm hearing to that is this strong passion, strong dedication that you have that's clearly so evident with the way you're speaking about your journey and your process and your book. And actually that need for a support system. And it sounds like you had a very, very strong support system to keep you afloat throughout that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And it can come from anywhere, whoever, support systems look different for different people, but it's so important. And like I said, the writing of it is so isolating. And so it was hard to share in that part of my process. But in that larger picture of like, I did with my husband, he knows these characters just as well, if not more than me. But outside of that, it's pretty much just me working on it. But so what you do really need is just people who can see that, understand that, even if they don't understand everything about it, and just respect that and still be like, it's okay. We'll meet on Sunday, or it's okay that there's been 50 agents. We will get to one. Yeah. So the support system, however it looks for you, is so important, and I think deserves a lot of credit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And actually now let's talk a bit more about the book. So Shape and Apostrophe. Before we jump into what it's a bit about, why it's important, do you mind just telling us a bit more about the title, the cover, what made you choose it's quite catchy, like it definitely had me curious when I heard the title, and then when I saw the cover, I was even more curious. Do you mind just sharing a bit around that, where it came from?
Yeah, sure. So the cover I will not take credit for, because that is entirely, designed and created by my publisher, and Steve Coventry Penton is the designer of the cover. But of course, it's reflecting themes. Lots of people see different things in that cover. There's fetal position, there's underwater, there's sadness, there's comfort. So it's a striking cover, and I think evokes different things in different people, which is really nice. And the title, the title came to me from actually a little girl that I saw once on the street in near Haji Ali in Bombay. And she had a cloth draped around her. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old, tiny little, almost looked veiled, but it wasn't a veil, it was just a cloth. And she looked like the shape of an apostrophe. And that's it. That was maybe 7 years before I even thought about the story. But as I was writing the story, she kept coming back to me, this little girl. And of course, given the narrative of the story, I can see why. And so I sort of put her into the novel, and symbolically, an apostrophe stands in the place of letters that have disappeared. So for the novel, it's what is holding what is not told, what is yet to be told, secrets, things that I can't reveal without giving away some spoilers here. So, but that's where it came from.
Oh, it's so exciting. I'm even more curious now. I'm more intrigued. I can't wait to dig into it. And we're so excited that you're going to be joining the Dubai Book Club that I run out here. And it'll be so nice to have there's loads of spoilers in that conversation and lots of Q&A. But so without giving too much away, do you mind telling us a little bit about the story, what it's about, and why you feel so passionate it's important to tell that story to people or women of today?
Yeah, the story is about Lena Solanki, a woman who never wanted to have children, but falls unexpectedly pregnant. It's an investigation of motherhood as a choice, and I should say probably parenthood as a choice. The novel is set in Dubai, and I've used the kind of beautiful, opulent backdrop as a contrast to what it means to be imprisoned in other people's expectations, in roles that we don't want to play in our life. And in the context of control over women's bodies, I think the question of choice is critical. In the case of my novel, instead of the public and the political space, it really zones in on the domestic space. And I've always believed that our domestic lives really reflect these wider societal shortcomings. And I just think there's a huge opportunity there, kind of the possibility of shifting these gendered dynamics, power dynamics that are at play in the outside world as well. But we have more control over what we can do with them in the household. Not always, but most of the time. However, what we see more commonly is that even the most powerful voices in public on a platform can be really weak at home. And why is that? In relationships with our parents or our in-laws or our spouses, what is it that kind of sometimes makes us shrink ourselves or not be the most honest versions of ourselves at home? And in the context of what's happening right now in the world, I hope that provides some hope that you could make a different choice in your life. And that is just as important and critical to kind of stop these patterns from getting inherited. And they can be the tiniest things. I'm going to call them micro inequities that are just masked in domestic life. Like, who is buying birthday gifts for a birthday party? Who is added to the school chat group? Why is there a hands-on dad and no hands-on mom? Because the standards to which we hold women are different than for men. I think men are allowed to reject parenthood with far less judgment or scrutiny. Women are made to feel like maybe they owe something to the world or to the family or something because of their biology. So yeah, I think in this idea of choice, and I don't just mean in that political sense, but really in our private lives, I think that's really important. And I think a lot of times we function on autopilot, like that's just how it's done in my, I don't know, insert family, community, religion, whatever it is. And I'd love for the story to have people check their autopilots. Like, why am I doing that thing? Do I want to play this role? Do I want to do? And I think we have more agency than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, nice. That whole, it has to start from home to make a difference. Yeah. And what is it that
Yeah.
you're hoping your readers take away from your book?
This is a tricky question because it's such a subjective experience. And I hope that readers will take away whatever it is they seek. I hope they find it there. Each person's absorption will be different. And now, having had the book out in the world for almost 2 months, I'm starting to see how different people feel different things. And that's a beautiful part of it. I think something that I would love for people to feel is liberation or relief. And, it's not an easy story. It's not like a la-di-da happy story. You're going to feel sad when you read it. It might make you feel uncomfortable. But the reward of those things is a freedom. And I think when we really act on our inner dictates versus really constantly satisfying something outside of us, we do eventually get to that freedom and that liberation. And I would love for readers to feel that through these characters in the story.
Great, thank you. And what's next for you? Another book, another movie?
Always more stories. That's all I'll say at the moment. there shall be more.
Ah, I love it. Watch this space. First of many. And so where can people get hold of your book? Tell us a bit more about how we can get hold of it, where you're next going to be, maybe doing some talks.
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me in my writing, and I talk a lot about the publishing process as well. On Instagram, my handle is at Uttama, short and simple, or my website, which is uttamapatel.com. You can buy the book at every major bookstore in the world. In the UAE, it's available like Kunia, Magrudy's, and Amazon as well. But of course, where you can, do support by buying it from a local bookshop.
Great, thank you. And finally, if there's one message you'd like to leave aspiring writers or creatives or just people who want to take an idea and do something with it, what would your advice be?
I love this question. I feel like I was seeking it when I started writing. I really wanted to hear this. I would say value what you do, even if and especially if other people devalue it. I think there has been this narrative, particularly around writers, artists, this starving artist attitude, or that is, I think, has held back the commercial success of creative people. And I would say, hold up your worth, envision that you will be rewarded for what you do, and you will, but I think, me, when I was growing up, it was like, you can't do creative writing. You're not going to make any money from it. So I did journalism and I did marketing, and I'm not the only one. There's tons of writers like me. So I would just say, for anybody doing anything that is, outside of what is considered a traditional path, just hold your value and demand what you should get for offering it.
Hold your value. I really, really like that. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this will get some sort of hope or determination or just having that compassion for themselves to continue with their long-term goal. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's been such a pleasure to just hear about you, your story. And I know me and the girls, as part of the Dubai Book Club, we're so excited to reconnect with you and really ask you lots of questions once we've done deep into the story of the family and Lena. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for taking the time to read the story and think about the story. And, I don't take that for granted. So thank you to you and the book club.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you love this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. And remember, every big journey starts with a small idea, a small passion, and a small calling for purpose.